Let's get started with the very basics of TempoWeave. When you first open your application, you'll see a screen similar to this one. You have a weaving draft on the main part of the screen, and across the top, you'll see some tabs that you can click to see different menu options. You'll have the area for your threading horizontally across the top. By default, it opens up with 8 shafts, and if I just click on these threads, you can see little numbers appear. So I've filled in 8 warp threads at this time. I can do the same thing in the tie-up. I can click numbers into the tie-up, and that would represent my treadle 1 being tied to shafts 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I can click in some treadling sequences. When I type those numbers, I also have a drawing tool selected. Up here in Draw Options, Straight Draw is selected by default. And when I hold my mouse down and drag, I can drag in a straight diagonal line and enter threads a lot more quickly than simply clicking into every cell. I can also click on like the point tool, and I could start here and do a point, or I could do that in the weft area as well. So let's look at the tie-up a little bit. Of course, I can click in the tie-up on the next treadle and enter its tie-up. I'm going to show you a little function off of a menu. I'm going to go to Design, and in the tie-up area, these are all tie-up options, and you can click on like the down arrow there and do things to the tie up, but we're going to use the diagonal function. It's a fun one that I use quite a bit. When I click this, it's going to take everything in treadle 1 and it's going to step it up by 1. So let's try that. So now we have a tie up. Our draft is represented here in the drawdown, and it's all black and white, and most of you probably know how to read a weaving draft, but just a very quick overview for those that may not be so sure. When I do treadle 1, I'm lifting shafts 1, 2, 3, and 4. When those shafts are lifted, those are black threads, so they're going to be on the top. And on this same pick, the threads that are on 5, 6, 7, 8 are being covered up by the weft because those shafts are sand down, and that's how weaving works. So on shaft 2, you can see that the tie-up is tied to 2, 3, 4, and 5, so that thread that's on 1 is now being covered up by the weft thread, and you'll see the 4 next warp threads on top. So this is just a little representation of what that little section of, let's see, we've got 24 weaving threads there, would look like. So let's talk about color. Right now we only have black and white, and by default the warp threads are going to be black, the weft are going to be white. So if I click this colorful area on the right is called my palette, and there are different palettes in TempoWeave, but when you first open it, this is the default palette that appears. I'm going to click on red. When I click on red, it doesn't change anything in my colors, but it shows me that my active palette is red. That means when I draw in these color bars, if I clicked and dragged, or I could have actually clicked individual cells to change the color of those threads, and it turns it whatever's in that active palette. If I wanted to put a little bit of maroon here on these alternating ones, I'm working with my active color of maroon right now. So that's how you change colors, and I can do the same thing. Let's put a little gray in here in the weft, and I can just drag it down and color them all. So that's a very simple example of entering a draft. If we wanted to save this draft, one way to save is on the home menu. I could do a save as, and I could decide to give it any kind of a name or put it anywhere I wanted to. So I'm going to do first draft and just save it. Now, let's talk about what a draft is, just very briefly. That saved a file on my computer. I'd actually saved 2 files, but they're both named first draft, and you see down in the bottom in green, it says first draft.wif saved, and it spelled out the path. Also, take a look at the top of the screen. You'll see the name of the draft along with its path of where you saved it up there on the top as well. And when TempoWeave saves a file, it saves a .wif file. That stands for Weaving Assembly File, and you can see that file type in your file system. Often the extensions are hidden by default, unless you've changed it to not hide them, but you also can see a type, and it's called Weaving Information File. TempoWeave also stores another one that's called TempoWeave Assembly File, and it has an extension of .twa. You don't really have to worry about that. If you just open either one, TempoWeave's going to have all your information there. The only time you really need to be conscious of which file you're using is when you're sharing it with someone else. If you want to share a WIF file like to a friend that doesn't have TempoWeave, you'd want to make sure to send the WIF file, because that's a standard that all weaving software can recognize. And also, if you're a Tempo Treadle user, you want to put the WIF files on your Tempo Treadle for use too, because that's the type of file it understands. So that's just a little bit about basics, but if you know that, you can save it, you can open it, you can find, so it doesn't matter which one I open. I can open first draft, and I can open it back up. Of course, it's already open. And to close, I can close it, and now we could open it. I could even type recent, which we'll go over in more detail, and you can see all the recent things you've worked with. You can pin things at the top. There are lots of ways to find and organize your drafts, and that's something you're going to want to, and I just clicked on that to reopen it. And that's something you'll become comfortable with, but what I would suggest at the beginning, especially if you're very new to any type of weaving design software, is just play a little bit. You can't hurt it. So go in here, draw into your threading and your treadling and tie up, see what happens, change the colors. It can be quite fun. You can copy drafts out of a magazine or a book, or you can just make up your own things and see what happens. And practice saving it. Practice saving as. Pick a file on your computer that makes sense to you. You can just put it in a junk folder that you're going to, some kind of temporary folder that you can just delete all your play WIFs. But try doing that until you're comfortable, so you know how to open and save files and how to use the basic functions, and then it'll be easy for you to move along to learn many new things that make it so easy to create drafts and also weaving projects with TempoWeave. So thanks for watching this first getting started, and now we'll move on to some more features.